It is a little after 1, so I think that we are going to get started. Hello and welcome everyone to the 7th class in the Library of Michigan's Digitization Basics series, Digital Capture, Digitization Process, and Quality Control. I'm Biz Gallo, Statewide Digitization Initiatives Coordinator, and my job is to help libraries and cultural heritage organizations throughout Michigan digitize their collections and make them accessible. In order to help prepare the state to do so, we've created this 9-part series that will lay the foundation for digitizing your collections. You can see the list of the other classes in the series here, which are held on the last Tuesday of each month, and we'll drop a link in the chat for registration. Now you can register for all of the classes or for only the ones that are of particular interest to you, whether to learn new skills or as a refresher. After the series, there will be more in-depth classes offered, both on these topics as well as a variety of other topics. For example, we'll have format-specific classes, such as digitizing newspapers, scrapbooks, and audiovisual material. We'll have resource-centered classes, such as working with vendors, working with interns and volunteers, and building a community archives. And procedural classes, such as writing digitization grant applications and creating digital exhibits. If there's anything you're particularly interested in, please let me know so I can develop programming around these topics. In addition to the Digitization Basics webinar series, we are currently developing niche academy modules from the material covered in this series so that you can hone your skills and earn badges in digitization. And it looks like these classes are going to be available starting next month. All right, we're going to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded so that you can access the content again later along with the slides. The recording should be available next week, allowing time for captioning. But if you've missed any of the previous classes, you can view the recordings by going to the Library of Michigan's webinar archive. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to drop questions in the chat throughout. If you have any technical or audio issues, please reach out to Becky in the chat so that she can help resolve them. And last, there are many additional resources on the digitization page of the Library of Michigan's website. Today, we're going to be looking at factors to consider when you're selecting equipment for digitization, the digital capture process, post-processing of digital files, and finally, quality control of your new digital files. But as you know, I always like to start off these classes with a poll. So Becky, if you'd go ahead and launch the poll, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what type of digitization equipment you have experience with. And you can go ahead and select all that apply. Types that are listed there are flatbed scanners, book edge scanners, overhead scanners, a copy stand or digital camera, film and slide scanners, other, or you haven't digitized any material yet. So why don't you take a couple seconds and submit your answers. Right. Well, this is very interesting. I'm sure that the flatbed scanner was going to be the most ubiquitous, so that makes sense. But there are actually a lot of people who've used copy stand or digital cameras, so that's really great to hear that you're already feeling comfortable with this. For the person who mentioned other, feel free to drop in the chat what other type of equipment you've used, and feel free to add some comments about it. Great. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And we will move on. Great. So I wanted to do that poll because we're going to be starting with equipment, and we're going to look at some of the considerations for selecting digitization equipment. And so for the purposes of our discussion today, I'm going to assume that you've already made the decision to digitize in-house, meaning that you will use your own facility and resources rather than using a digitization service provider. So this means that you've determined that purchasing and maintaining equipment is the most cost-effective way to digitize your material rather than outsourcing this to a project vendor. So when you're selecting what equipment to purchase or procure, there are many options available, and selecting the right equipment for your project or program will be essential for success. Let's explore some of the considerations for equipment selection. First, determine whether this equipment will be used for a specific project or an ongoing program. If this is for a specific project where you know exactly what formats you'll be working with and what the output needs are, you can be a little bit more targeted in finding the equipment that will best suit that project. Now, if this equipment will be used for a general digitization program that will cover a wide range of sizes, formats, and needs, you'll want to explore equipment that would work for a larger range of material. Next, consider the amount of material to be digitized. Is this for only a few hundred items, or are you looking at several thousand? You'll need to ensure that whatever equipment you purchase can not only handle the amount of material you plan on scanning, but also at an appropriate pace. When considering the amount of staff time that might be saved with a high-powered scanner, it can be a worthwhile investment to purchase a faster scanner that will save you significant staff time over the course of a large project. You'll also need to consider the size, format, and condition of the material you'll be digitizing. The smaller the object, the higher resolution is needed to capture the details, so you'll need to identify equipment that can meet your optical resolution requirements. If the material is oversized, it might not fit on a standard flatbed scanner, so you may need to select alternate equipment. If you have transmissive material, such as photographic slides or negatives, you'll likely need to purchase adapters or specialized scanners. If the material is in poor or fragile condition, you'll need to use equipment that won't further damage or strain the original. You'll also need to consider whether the equipment will meet your technical specifications. Scanning equipment will have varying technical capabilities when it comes to optical resolution, file format outputs, color, and bit depth. So when you're exploring equipment options, first identify what your specifications are, and then select equipment that will meet or exceed your needs. You'll need to determine if and how the equipment fits within your environment. If you have limited or shared space, it might not be feasible to purchase large scanning equipment that will limit your other activities. If you're using a copy stand or DSLR setup, there are many recommendations for the ambient light and wall color of the environment in which it will be used, so your environment may extend to more than just the desk space. You'll need to determine ease of use. Is this complex equipment that you'll need to have scheduled maintenance on? Is this something your staff or volunteers can easily manage, or does it require specialized training? If so, does your staff have the time and skills to acquire this training? Does it need special installation, or is it something that's more plug and play? Finally, you'll need to consider what you can afford. Beyond the initial purchase, you may need to also purchase adapters, hardware, maintenance contracts, software subscriptions, or more. Once you've considered what you need, you can begin to explore the various equipment types available to fit those needs. Scanners and cameras are tools used to transform analog images and documents into raster graphics, and each has its own benefits and drawbacks. Digitization equipment can range from $50 to hundreds of thousands of dollars for the most high-end equipment. But today, we're going to be focusing on some of the more common tools for digitization that you would find in a library or cultural heritage organization. First, and as we saw, the most common type of scanner found in cultural heritage organizations are the flatbed scanners. These are often fast, simple to use, and can digitize everything from documents to photographic prints to film strips. These scanners range from very low to very high quality with price tags to match, so there are many options for almost any project and budget. These are often preferred due to their versatility and ease of use. That being said, there are some limitations to flatbed scanners. They are not suited for bound material, like books, as laying them flat would put pressure on the book spines. They're not suited for oversized material, like maps or newspapers, as their scanning platens or glass surfaces are often not large enough to accommodate such large material. And they're not suited for fragile material, like warped or curled photographs, as flattening them under the scanner lid could cause irreparable damage. The next type of scanner is a book edge scanner. And this is similar to a flatbed scanner because it has a scanning platen that you put material directly on and a lid to hold material in place. But the platen goes right to the edge so that you can digitize bound material without damaging the binding or the spine. These also often have larger scanning platens, so even larger bound materials can be scanned using them. However, as book edge scanners are designed primarily to digitize textual material, they often do not have high enough resolutions to capture detailed images sufficiently. Next are overhead scanners. These overhead scanners are versatile as they can capture a variety of formats, from photographs to bound and unbound text material. They are often used for digitizing books and come with features like page turn detection that can scan automatically after it senses a page has been turned. Some models come with adjustable book cradles to hold and support bound material, and some models can digitize up to an A2 size. These are not recommended for film or transmissive material digitization. Similar to an overhead scanner is the digital copy stand. Copy stands are used along with digital cameras for digitization, and they are extremely versatile, digitizing common formats like photographs and documents, as well as 3D objects, fragile materials that would be strained or damaged on a flatbed, photographic negatives, and more. There is a bit of a learning curve with this equipment, however, as they do not have the hit the scan button ease of some of the other equipment. There is also an investment in supplementary equipment, like light boxes or light sources, but their speed, versatility, and high quality results make them a popular choice. Last, we have the film or slide scanner. These are specialty scanners designed for digitizing film negatives or slides. You can often find models that offer magazines that allow you to load up to 50 slides at a time. This media requires a very high resolution in order to capture all of the information held in the tiny frame, and this can take a lot of time per scan. So having the ability to load dozens of items at a time is a benefit to this type of equipment. So on the plus side, you can digitize a large number of photographic slides or negatives at a time, but it can only digitize these formats. There are many options out there, and knowing what you have to digitize will be essential when picking the right equipment for your organization. You'll have cost, ease of use, space, and upkeep to consider. And that is one of the reasons that we developed the Digitization Equipment Selection Matrix, along with my colleague Amy Bacco, Digital Projects Librarian at Western Michigan University. This is a tool that suggests various types of equipment based on the material you have to scan. Depending on the type of media you have in your collection, you can identify the equipment recommended for the media type or types. For example, if you have photographic prints, photographic slides, and unbound text documents in your collection, you would want to look at flatbed scanners or copy stands. If you were looking to digitize bound volumes, like your yearbook collection, you would want to explore book edge scanners, overhead scanners, and copy stands. From there, you can explore the equipment type tabs that list various makes and models of equipment. Each model has key features listed, like cost, technical specifications, and additional features. From there, you can sort models based on these features and find equipment that meets all of your digitization project or institutional needs. There are also additional resource tabs that provide further guidance on selecting equipment and links to equipment for building your own copy stand environment. In the end, you can explore a variety of tools to help you find equipment that will meet both your needs and the needs that your infrastructure will support. Okay, so now that we have our equipment selected, we are ready to digitize. When digitizing material, you should make sure that your environment is prepared. Find a large level workspace that provides enough room for not only the scanner, but also for you to handle the material to be digitized. You'll want to ensure that the space is free from clutter. In addition to keeping scanned material safe from damage, you also want to be able to organize material so you know what has been digitized and what remains to be digitized. Ideally, this space will be away from direct sunlight, as prolonged exposure to ultraviolet light can damage materials. It should also be close to a power supply so you can avoid extension cords. Consider the number of cords you may be wrangling if you have a scanner, a light source, a computer, and any other equipment. Extension cords are a trip hazard, and not only could someone be injured if they trip, they could also damage fragile material and equipment. Wherever you set up your scanning station, make it a food and drink-free zone. If necessary, allow water in sealed containers. Once you have your workspace set up, you'll need to prepare yourself and the material. So before you start pulling items out to scan, make sure you have clean, dry hands or that you're wearing nitrile gloves. Oil and dirt from fingerprints can cause damage to photographic materials like photographic prints, slides, and negatives. So be sure to wear gloves if you'll be handling fingerprint-sensitive materials. It is not recommended that you wear cotton gloves as they limit your dexterity and can actually lead to damaging material. You should also go ahead and remove any jewelry you have on, such as rings, that could scratch the scanner glass. Once you're ready to handle material, you can begin to prepare it. Ideally, you would have done some preliminary assessment and organization of the material ahead of time. We're assuming that selection has already taken place, that duplicates have been weeded out, and that you're not pawing through a box to see, what should I scan next? Remove any staples or paper clips from documentation, as those can also scratch the scanner glass. You can remove rubber bands or any other fixtures holding materials together to make the process more streamlined at this time as well. You may take this time to identify any items that need conservation work or rehousing. Digitization is a great opportunity to rehouse materials, as items will be accessible and handled individually. You can simply remove the item from its original housing, scan it, and place it in the new housing with little to no additional handling. If material does need conservation work, such as mold remediation or heavy cleaning, make sure that any of this work is done separately and planned for ahead of time. There will always be surprises during a digitization project, but the more prepared you can be, the better the overall result. Be sure to secure or remove loose materials. For example, if you're digitizing a scrapbook that contains photographs or clippings, ensure that they are secured to the page. If you're digitizing an item that has extraneous materials like post-it notes or inserts, be sure to remove those before scanning, as they could block content. When you're organizing material to scan, it can be beneficial to organize materials by type and/or size to process like materials at once. Scanning documents will have different settings than scanning photographic prints, which will have different settings than scanning film negatives. By grouping materials together by their respective settings, it streamlines the process and allows you to save time by not having to change scanner settings or physical setup, such as the use of slide adapters. When you're constantly changing back and forth between various settings and setups, you're more prone to make a mistake than if you were working with consistent specifications. Speaking of settings, before scanning any material, take time to determine and document your scanning. Specifications like resolution, bit depth, and color mode will change depending on the original source material and your own infrastructure. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution that will fit every item, but there are useful guides for choosing the best target for both your material and your storage capacity. Remember, the higher the resolution and bit depth, the larger the resulting file size. You will want to scan once and use many times. So does that mean that you should scan to the highest quality possible for every scan? Probably not. You should be scanning to the highest quality necessary to capture the material as it is. This scan should meet both your current needs and potential future needs. You'll need to determine the resolution, bit depth, color, and file format. And there are two excellent resources for identifying these targets. The first is the federal agency's Digital Guideline Initiative's Technical Guidelines for Digitizing Cultural Heritage Materials. This is the best practices document, and it provides a wealth of information about technical specifications, equipment recommendations, and workflows for all media types that you are considering digitizing. The second is the Association for Library Collections and Technical Services Minimum Digitization Capture Recommendations document. This document provides recommendations for minimum capture specifications that should fulfill most needs. So try and explore both of these resources and find something that will fit in the middle. All right, so once you've determined your capture specifications, be sure to document these choices to ensure consistency over time and for quality control purposes. If you're looking for somewhere to document these decisions, take time to explore the Digitization Project Planning Guide, which has sections to record all of these settings. Before you scan, and depending on what type of equipment you're using, there will likely be some auto settings. Be sure to turn these off as they can introduce artifacts to your scans and will result in images that don't faithfully represent the original. Last, set up your file naming convention and set a folder to save your scans to. Let's take a look at how creating a good file naming convention. Creating good file names is essential for long-term management of data over time. File names should be unique and both machine readable and human readable. This means that your file system can find and sort the files based on their names, but that the file names also make sense to a human reading it. File names are not the place to include a lot of descriptive information about the file contents. That sort of metadata should be stored elsewhere. But here are a few tips for creating good file names. File names should be alphanumeric, meaning that they should use letters and numbers. Avoid using special characters in file names, as these characters are used by operating systems and have different meanings to computers than they do to humans. An exception to this would be the use of dashes or underscores. You should use dashes or underscores in place of spaces between characters for separation of elements. Use leading zeros to help with file sorting. You could also use standardized dates to help with sorting by year, then month, then date. You can include dashes to separate the date elements, but they're not necessary, and honestly, they just add additional characters to your file name. And this is important because various operating systems have different capabilities, so you want to keep your file names relatively short. I recommend keeping them at 32 or fewer characters to ensure that they're able to be accessed on any file system. Common file naming structures might include an institutional acronym, a collection identifier, a series or box grouping, an item number, and a file type. It's advisable to use acronyms to save space and for consistency, but be sure that whatever the acronym stands for is documented somewhere. When trying to keep the 32 or fewer characters, this does not include the 3 or 4-digit file extension. Be sure to include that in the file name and don't change or hide the extension. Above all, document your file naming convention and be consistent. When you're working with digital files, it's essential to be organized so that you can find what you're looking for. And it might seem obvious what something is and what folder it's in when you're in the midst of a project, but the more files you create, the more you and your staff have to manage. Before you start scanning, remember to develop a folder structure to ensure that you stay organized. You may have different methods depending on which point of the process you're in. For example, it might be good to organize your ingest files together by date and or the person doing the work if you have many staff members working on the same project, so that you can track files through the process. You could organize by scanned, post-processed, QC'd, and final versions, so you know what the status of each file is by its location. But that won't be efficient for long-term storage. Once you've created quality digital files that are ready for access and long-term storage, it would be good to separate the preservation master files from the derivatives in order to reduce access and simplify running routine fixity checks. Where your preservation master files would be in a write-protected directory or otherwise less accessible, you can keep your JPEGs on a local server for easier access. When you're ready to make final folders, consider a top-level folder for the collection, then subfolders based on relevant groupings like year, location, or project. Find a hierarchy that makes sense for your institution. Folder structure and file naming should be useful, consistent, and documented. Are you noticing a trend here? Okay, so now that we have our scanning environment set up for success, our material is prepped, and our settings and file organization have been set and documented, we're ready to scan. Take this opportunity to clean the scanner again if you hadn't before, and to clean the camera lens if you're using a camera. Gently remove dust from the items using a bulb and not compressed air, which can damage material. Scan one page at a time and be careful to support the object when handling. Try not to stress the bindings or flatten the object if it's curled. When placing an item on the scanning platen, leave a border around the edge of the item so that nothing is cut off in the scan. About 1/8 of an inch border should be sufficient, but do some test scans to make sure that everything lines up the way you expect. You can always crop out blank space from an image, but you can't capture content that was missed without re-scanning. Once you have the item in place, gently lower the scanner lid to make sure a gust of air doesn't displace the item and that unnecessary pressure isn't put on the original. In your scanning software, it's a good idea to preview the item. This will help ensure that nothing is cut off or has moved from where you set the original in place. You can also often use the scanning software to select only the area that you wish to scan if the item is smaller than your scanning platen. This is ideal as it can save you scanning time, especially if you're scanning something at a very high resolution. If you need to, go ahead and make adjustments. If everything looks good, go ahead and press scan. The last thing I wanted to mention about scanning is that you may want to include color targets or grayscales in your digital capture of reflective material. Targets are used as a reference in the scan for both the size and proper tone reproduction. They will usually have a ruler included on them so you can confirm both the size of the original and resolution accuracy. These targets have color control patches as well as aim points for white, mid-level gray, and black for grayscale that can be used in post-processing to compare your scan to the control color or make adjustments if necessary. All right, so now that we have a digital image, we're halfway there. But before we finish, we need to do some adjustments, and this is the post-processing phase. Once you have digitally captured an item, whether by using a scanner or a digital camera, the resulting file will likely require at least some post-processing. When digitizing, your target should be able to capture the original as accurately as possible, rather than relying on serious post-processing. In this example from Oregon State University Libraries, you can see that the image on the left has significant details missing, resulting from a bad scan. The image on the right is a much better scan, with great tonal reproduction and none of the loss of detail in the highlights or the shadows from the image on the left. No amount of post-processing would overcome the limitations of the bad scan on the left. Adjustments such as color correction, tonal adjustments, and sharpening should be done sparingly on preservation files, as these processes result in data loss. And this loss is irreversible once the file has been saved, so it's advisable that instead you make derivatives for post-processing. How many derivatives? Well, it's recommended that you have 3 files for each original object. You would have a preservation master, a production master, and an access copy. Each file type will have its own use, and you'll determine what level of adjustment is needed for each. The preservation master, also called the archival master, is the highest quality file that has all of the information from the original retained. This will have little to no post-processing done. It should be either an uncompressed TIFF or a losslessly compressed file format such as JPEG 2000. The next file is the production master or service copy. This is a copy of the preservation master file at either the same or a very high resolution. This will be different from the preservation master file as it will be edited to crop out either blank space around the item or remove artifacts like the color guides or grayscales. There could also be some minor adjustments to the file, such as deskewing or color or tonal adjustments. FADGI guidelines do recommend that image processing should be reserved for optimizing an image rather than for overcoming poor imaging. Last will be the access or use copy. This will be made from the edited production master file, but even further reduced in size and quality. The purpose of this file is for easier access and sharing via the web, so compressed file format such as JPEG is ideal. Now, you can add a suffix to the file names to indicate its file type, such as _P for preservation, M for master, or A for archival. You could have P for production, S for service, A for access, U for use. It really doesn't matter. Your organization will have its own file naming schema and folder structure. The important thing for you to do is to document your decisions so that you can be consistent within your organization. All right. So if you have textual information in your collection, it's advisable that you take an additional step to both increase its discoverability and its accessibility. One of the steps you can take is to perform optical character recognition, or OCR, on any typewritten material. This is a process by which the raster image is converted to digitally coded text. For example, if you digitize a photograph of a dog and a document with text that says, "This is a dog," the computer cannot tell the difference. The computer only sees ones and zeros in the raster image. However, if you perform optical character recognition on that file, it identifies the shapes of the letters and converts them into coded text that computers can understand as text. That way, when you search for the word dog in the file, it now recognizes it. Now, if you have digitized handwritten material, such as a letter or a diary, character recognition software will likely not work on the content due to the highly variable nature of handwritten material. You will likely have to rely on manual transcription of the text in order to make it accessible. Be sure to include either OCR or manual transcription in your workflow, as users that rely on screen reader or text-to-speech technology will need these features in order to access your content. They also make the content full text searchable, which can help users find what they're looking for quickly and easily. Finally, once your files are finalized to the point where they are ready to be managed over time, it's recommended that you create checksums. Checksums are hash algorithms that convert a data string, or the binary data that make up the file, into an output string. It is unique to the file like a fingerprint, so that if a single bit changes, if a 1 becomes a 0 or vice versa, the hash will be completely different. For example, you see the checksum generated for digital preservation rocks here. If I recreate that, every time I will get the same checksum hash. But if I change a single character in that string, like adding an exclamation point in the bottom example, the checksum changes. And not just a tiny bit. You'll see that the whole string has completely changed. Checksums are very useful in telling you that something has changed, but it's also impossible to determine what has changed. We'll talk more about checksums in the digital preservation class in September, but I wanted to mention that creating checksums as part of the digital capture workflow. These checksums should be created early in the process so that they can be used in the future, whether to validate data when stored to ensure that the file hasn't changed over time, or when transferring the file to ensure that it was moved correctly and in its entirety. All right. The last step in the digital capture process that we're going to cover today is quality control. What is quality control? Quality control, also referred to as QC, includes activities that examine production through observation or testing to determine if they meet their specifications. The purpose of this activity is to detect defects in products or processes where defects are defined as deviating from predetermined requirements. That's a lot. So what does that mean for digitization? It means that QC is a process by which we verify the quality, accuracy, and consistency of digital files created during digitization. That the workflow and processes we have in place produce the desired outputs. That equipment is calibrated and functioning correctly. That the vendor is delivering files according to our specifications. We perform QC early and often to ensure that the digital files we create hit their targets. So why is this important for digitization? For starters, many times the digital version will be the only version that users interact with, so ensuring that it is as accurate as possible is essential. Second, if the original is damaged or deteriorating, or if it's on obsolete audiovisual media, there may not be future opportunities to redigitize. QC helps ensure that when we digitally capture an item, we have the best, most complete version possible. Last, Even if you still have the material and it is able to be digitized, digitization can be an expensive undertaking, and you don't want to spend limited resources to redigitize something that you've already spent time and money on. So we check the files. If files don't pass QC, you can either make adjustments to your scanning setup, you can rescan items, or you can refine your QC parameters. You may choose to QC every item or a subset of items once a project is running smoothly, but be sure to document QC parameters, thresholds, and decisions around QC. Let's look a little bit closer at QC considerations. First, you'll want to determine what you'll be checking and document it. Remember earlier when we talked about determining what our scan settings are and documenting those settings? That is so that we can verify that the outputs are correct at this stage of the process and that they are matching those settings. There will be both technical specifications and quality to verify. Technical specifications would be confirming whether a file's resolution, color, bit depth, and file format are correct. Quality refers to the content itself, such as whether the content is correct and complete, that there are no missing pages, hands covering material, or blurred images. Once you've determined what you'll be checking, you'll have to determine your QC thresholds. Is everything pass-fail? Is there an acceptable or an unacceptable range? What happens with files that fail QC or fall within a certain range? Do you QC more material? Do you redigitize everything? Whatever your thresholds are, make sure that these are well defined and documented so that whoever QCs the files can be consistent in how they apply them. You'll also have to determine how much work you will check. Will you QC every file? Will you QC preservation masters only, or some combination? I would recommend that you check everything, at least for the pilot or the project ramp. Once you've confirmed that your targets are being met and that workflows are actually flowing, you can incrementally reduce the amount of material you QC. Whether it's a given number or a percentage, find a subset that works for your project and infrastructure. Like with most digitization, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to QC. Last, how often are you checking files? Daily? Monthly? In batches? Be sure to note when QC takes place and don't leave too much time in between in case there is an issue. If you're digitizing hundreds of items a day, the number of mistakes being made can be huge if left unchecked for long. Remember, whatever you determine, document it. When you develop a QC workflow, make sure that you have a system of tracking your efforts so that you can record evaluations and see trends over time. Clearly define baseline characteristics for pass-fail, acceptable, or unacceptable, and document these to establish consistent application of evaluation criteria across your institution. Set up an environment that is appropriate for performing the necessary tasks. Ideally, this would be on a different computer than the one being used for digitization to ensure that you're able to identify issues with the hardware or software setups. Take the time to calibrate your computer monitor to ensure that the color outputs are accurate for visual material. Images should be reviewed at 100% magnification at least to ensure that you're seeing an accurate representation of the image in whatever file viewing program you use. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. You cannot create quality where it doesn't exist. Acknowledge and accept that many of the documents you'll be scanning will be old, faded, or damaged. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't get the best possible scan, but you should avoid using auto settings that can camouflage the flaws in the original. The goal is to create a digital surrogate of the original item as it is. So, QC is twofold. First, that the digital surrogates you're creating are faithful representations of the original media, and two, that the files you're creating meet the technical standards you have set. When it comes time to actually review the files, there is a wide range of parameters to check. Some are better suited to computer review, and some are better suited to human review. For example, some objective factors such as file format, resolution, bit depth, and color mode are more easily evaluated by a computer. By exploring file properties or using a file format validation tool like Jove, you can confirm that the files meet your technical specifications. Alternatively, some parameters are much better suited to human review. For example, a computer has no idea if the image file under review is blurry or cut off or of the wrong content. That is why QC should be a balance of computer validation and human review. Check to make sure that the file matches the original content, that it is correct and complete, and that nothing has been cropped out. Confirm that there are no digital artifacts introduced in scanning, such as moire patterns, Newton rings, or pixelization. Check for physical artifacts that might have been introduced during scanning, such as dust on the lens, a hair on the platen, or even a hand covering the page. Evaluate the quality of the image. Is it too light, too dark? Is it blurry? Is there a loss of detail in the highlights or the shadows? Again, this goes back to the thresholds we talked about earlier. Some of these parameters, like most of the objective ones, will be pass-fail, while subjective ones may be in a range of acceptable to unacceptable. As you build your digitization program, consider saving examples of artifacts and files that have both unacceptable and acceptable features so that you and other QC staff can have a reference to compare future QC results against. And some of these might indicate that there was just a bad scan or a really difficult original to be captured. But perhaps it's a bigger issue and there's a problem with either your workflow, your training, or equipment. Whatever the results, be sure to document them and address them according to your documented, predetermined procedures for resolving QC fails. The last thing I'm going to mention is metadata QC. Metadata is extremely time-consuming to create, so you want to make sure that it's being done correctly. Just like with the other aspects of QC, there will be facets that are better suited to computer review and those that are better suited to humans. Steps like XML validation should be left to computers, which are much better at detecting data issues than humans. Alternatively, the computer doesn't know that this is actually a portrait of Harriet Tenney, first woman state librarian of Michigan, and not Harriet Beecher Stowe. That sort of work is much better left to humans to confirm that the metadata is accurate and complete. And finally, if you have text documents scanned, be sure to check for errors in the OCR and transcription. All right, that was a lot for today. So just remember to pick the right equipment for your content and infrastructure. Take time to set up your scanning environment for success. Create and document good folder structure and file names. Create different files for different uses. Post-process files minimally and try to avoid any changes to the preservation master file. Perform QC early and often. And finally, because it bears repeating, document everything. Okay, so what questions do you have for me? I'm going to check through the chat. Question from Christopher, recommendations for color accurate monitors and validation software. So the question was recommendations for color accurate monitors and validation software. So that is something that I can follow up with a list for. There are a variety of tools out there and they range from moderately expensive to very expensive. And I have a list of items that I can send out to you and anyone else who might be interested in that. So I will make a note to deliver that. Okay, comments on Abby FineReader OCR software versus others. So I would like to state that the Library of Michigan cannot endorse specific vendors or equipment, so that is my caveat. In terms of Abby FineReader versus other OCR software, I've had good experience with Abby FineReader. I've also used Adobe with their built-in. I find that Abby FineReader is easier to make changes when you're correcting OCR. Or at least I have found it easier to use Abby FineReader to make those sorts of corrections. And I've found that if you have other language material other than English language material, there are more options for other languages, though I don't know how accurate they are not speaking other languages. But Abby Fine Reader is something that I've used, and it has worked fine for my needs, as well as Adobe. And if there are versions out there that are better than others for all of those softwares. So, you can have different levels depending on your needs. If this is just something that you have a handful of items, it might not be worth investing in costly software, because most of these now are subscription based, and it's not something where you're purchasing an instance of it. You are subscribing to it annually. So it might be something where you could test out different ones, or have, use a trial version to see how it fits with your specific content as well. Depending on if you're scanning a lot of content that might be less easily identified, maybe one works better than the other, and you could try that out. So I always recommend, if you can, trying a few different either software or hardware. If you can, see what works best for your environment, because it really isn't a one size fits all. And I like to do tests. I like to see what works. I hope that answered your question. Oh, all right. Christopher says, I had chosen Abby Fine Reader because there was a problem. There was a program to convert the two XML formats needed to newspaper conversion. Okay, how did that work for you? You can feel free to unmute yourself and make it a conversation, or you can drop stuff in the chat. So, anyone feel free to.
Well, the whole objective was to ultimately digitize my local papers, and so in following Library of Congress guidelines and what they were using, and the two, I forgot the names of the two XML formats at the top of my head here. One was on an article basis, and the other one was a page layout format. And there was a script for that, and I haven't seen a similar script. I'm curious if there's one for the Adobe or some other products that are out there for doing that conversion.
I am not sure, but I will make a note to look into that, because I'm interested. And we rely on the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan for all of our newspaper digitization. And so they wonderfully handle all of that. But I will definitely reach out to them about, because they had been participating in the National Digital Newspaper Project through the Library of Congress for the previous several years. So I'm sure that they have at least recommendations for either what software they use, or if they found that one worked better than the other. So I will do that and follow back up with you.
Yeah, not everybody can win the Twitter lotto every year.
Yeah, get your tweets out. All right, so Laura M asks, the next class for the series is in August, correct? Or is it in September? So the next class, they're held the last Tuesday of the month. The one in August is on digital access and creating digital collections. And then the final class in September will be on digital preservation. All right, so let's see. Janet asks, if your originals are black and white, is it better to use a black and white or color camera/scanner? So I guess the question is, are they really black and white, or are they grayscale? Is this a photograph, or is this a text document? So if it was a black and white photograph, I would recommend capturing that in grayscale, or even in color, depending on the quality of the photograph. If it's something, we would not be doing photographs. Okay, so then I'm assuming that this is for a text document. If it's for just text that's in black and white, I would recommend doing bitonal, because it's going to, not knowing enough about your infrastructure, but it's going to be a smaller file size, and you don't really need grayscale for that. A lot of people really prefer the look of bitonal or black and white digitization scans rather than grayscale when it comes to that. And the high contrast of black and white makes optical character recognition more successful usually. But you can always try out some, different scans and see what works best for you. I always think that, these are subjective and, something I might prefer in grayscale, other people might like the crisp clarity of a black and white scan that has more success in optical character recognition. Yep, Christopher added, depends on the quality of the original. Yes, as with everything, it depends. Um, the high contrast of black and white might make it easier to perform the optical character recognition. Any other questions?
Yeah, the comment there was if it's a typewritten document,
Mm.
each letter may not be struck evenly depending on who the typist was.
Mm-hmm.
So doing black and white would end up cutting off the letters rather than grayscale.
Yeah. So it really just depends on the quality of the original and what you're planning to do with it. But I like to recommend that people make things as accessible as possible. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions.
I just wanted to comment. And I know most of the libraries there have budgets, so they just pretty much buy whatever they can afford at the time. But I was successful years ago before shipping was stupid in acquiring the Kaiser brand of copy stands piecemeal, like by the column from one source, the base from another, and the lights from a third. And so the whole thing coming together was much less than buying it brand new at B&H or something like that. So you can kind of keep your eye out once you decide on your model, and sometimes get things pulled together piecemeal just from people that are trying to get rid of stuff rather than the retail dollar.
Oh, definitely. And for a lot of equipment, just because it's used doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work well. A lot of times people might purchase something for a specific project and then they don't have a need for it anymore, and they started using some maybe small scale equipment and now they're looking to upgrade and they don't need these little smaller scanners. So there's no reason, if you can check out some of these scanners that people might be selling or even borrowing. I also like to say that if you have a relationship with another organization, or even if you don't, you can just cold call them. And if they have that equipment, seeing if you could stop by and use it, see if that's something that you might want to purchase, or if you get it and you think there is no way that we're going to be able to, manage this equipment. The Library of Michigan circulates digitization kits that have two different types of scanners included in them. And one of the reasons for creating the kits was so that people could digitize material without having to invest in costly equipment. But the other reason was so that they could try different types of equipment if they were thinking about purchasing it. So one of the organizations that borrowed a kit really liked it, and they ended up purchasing a kit afterwards, through their own resources. But if you can borrow a kit, if you can, or borrow equipment from somebody, if you can use equipment that somebody already has and see if it works for you, definitely do that, because a lot of this equipment can be really costly to invest in, and you want to make sure that it is something that is going to work within your environment. I was working with a library staff in another state, and they had kind of purchased a lot of lot of upscale equipment, and they got it installed and they hadn't tested any beforehand, and the staff just hated it. They didn't think it was intuitive. They didn't like how it worked. In terms of scanning quality, it was exactly what they wanted, but in terms of user experience, everybody hated it. So if you can test out equipment beforehand, or you can borrow something or go somewhere and use something, I would recommend it. All right, so that is all for today. Of course, you can feel free to reach out to me afterwards, or even your colleagues, because hopefully we're creating a community of practice here where we all have experience and can share our experience. But I'd like to invite you to join me for our next class in the Digitization Basics series. We'll be exploring access and creating digital collections on Tuesday, August 30th. And Becky has already dropped the link, I think, to register for that class. But I'd like to thank you all for coming today and thank the Institute for Museum and Library Services for making this project possible. Please be sure to take the survey to help us improve our programming, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing you all next month.
If I may make one last little comment, I'm sorry.
Sure.
One of the things you didn't really cover in terms of scanners are bar scanners. And by that, I mean the handheld
Like
scanners.
the wands?
Well, they're like the width of an they're 8.5 inches wide by about an inch high and square. And from the cultural institution side of things, museums, we found them very useful when you're out in the field, visiting somebody, interviewing them, doing oral history, and they have some photos to share with you. And you take along a sheet of acetate so that you can place that over the photo, so your rollers and everything else from your scanner are not in contact with the original, and you can scan on the spot right there. They're also very useful for, we have aerial photographs of the area, and which are very large format. And again, it's almost easier to use one of these hand scanners just rolling and curving with the big pad than it is to dismantle the entire book and put it under a copy stand. Yes, it takes some post-processing in terms of gluing all the sweeps together afterward, but the resolution's 600 EPI, it works. So it's something to consider, and it's not that expensive either.
Yeah, I don't really have much experience using the sort of bar scanners, but if it worked for you, then I think that's great. And I hadn't thought about taking them out into the field. And I know more and more organizations are really looking into kind of community scanning, or, kind of the scan and release style of things, where, we would create digital surrogates for your material. You could tell us about your content, and it can help us build really this local history collection while you still get to retain your originals and we get the digital files and the metadata that goes with it. So having more portable options like that is a great idea. Great. Thank you for that comment. All right. Well, thank you for those of you who stuck around. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.